Did
Yes.
most of the heavy lifting on it. You worked hard. The rest of us just showed up. Mr. Pollan.
Hello, Mark.
Mark, check your mic. Check it. You think I turned it off?
I think you turned it off instead of on.
True enough. Okay. Better? It's much better. Okay, good. I'll say this little fundamental thing. We think that edible education has established two very basic things that we've all talked about a lot. And if we're going to start quoting Wendell, there's no reason for us to be here, so I'm not going to. One is that the food system has endemic problems that won't be solved unless they're addressed directly. And two is that there are alternatives. That's the sort of bottom line. That's the starting place. We think a lot of that. I think a lot of that was covered in this class. I think those of you who are students who didn't know about this before have learned a great deal about this stuff. But there are many open questions. And a year and a half ago, if you can believe that, Michael and two of our colleagues, friends, Ricardo Salvador and Olivia DeShooter, and I sat down in Michael's living room and tried to figure out what we might do as a group that would be unifying and helpful and non-controversial among the people who mostly are on the same side, and smart. And we decided that we would, it took us many hours, and then it took us many weeks after that, and then it took us nearly a year to publish what we decided to do. We decided to publish a call for a national food policy. So I think we're going to talk about that process and that policy here, and we're going to talk about some of the things that, some of the issues that it raises and some of the things that we might think about doing in lieu of not doing a national food policy, because it's obviously going to be hard to get that done. And we're going to talk about some things that just tickle us both right now, and some issues that we believe have come up in almost every week's talk. And then we're going to take questions. And the time will fly.
Let me just add something to what you said. I think buried in one of those 2 points is the term food system. And I think it's probably one of the most important things that's been discussed, and in some ways taken for granted, but it was certainly at the center of the opening lecture. And that is that it is a system, and all the parts are connected. And so how we grow food dictates how we eat food, which dictates our health of the environment, and that is all of a piece. And I think if you come away from this class with that idea, you have a powerful idea. And that it is, as Gary said, a cultural matter, a political matter, an economic matter, a moral matter, an ethical matter. But that the unity of it is a really key thing to deal with. And that is both very encouraging, because it suggests that if you change one part, you might have an effect on the whole. But it also makes the problem seem sometimes really large and unapproachable. And one of the questions we've is part of, this conversation on stage is part of a longer conversation that Mark and I have been engaged in for several years with one another and a bunch of other people. This is kind of how movement building works. It comes out of conversations. But one of the issues that I know concerns many of the students in this room and the guests is, so what do we do? We've been introduced to a great many endemic problems. What can we do as individuals, as a group? And that's really what led to this idea of getting together, formalizing our conversation a bit, putting it down on paper, and then publishing a piece that we were hoping would drive some action from the administration, perhaps naively. The Obama administration has been, has, I think, on this issue and a great many others, raised a lot of hopes for reform. And at least in the case of food systems issues, have not really been realized. But our attempt in doing this, when we did, was we were trying to seize on the fact that Obama seemed interested in making a legacy such as he could without Congress, and make unilateral moves. And that's one of the reasons this idea of a food policy seems so appealing, because it's something he could have done without, he could have appointed someone or convened a council the way we have an environmental policy council or a health policy council or regulatory affairs. There are all these different White House councils that attempt to get on top of the agencies and kind of bring some coherence to what the government does. And so that was, what we were trying to do. It seems like kind of a meta idea. It doesn't kind of have a lot of emotional force. We need a food policy, but in a way, it kind of underlies getting anything done. And by putting it forward, it makes you see that, wow, it's an important issue on which we don't have a policy. We have an agricultural policy, but that's a very different thing. And the reason that we thought this was important is that once you start talking about a food systems policy, agriculture then becomes subordinated to it. And so your agricultural policies, which we do have, need to support your health objectives, your environmental objectives, your education objectives. So it was an attempt to kind of force a conversation that would be a little more systemic than discrete pieces.
I want to go back again to the systems, just one thing about the systems thing, and then try to take that a little further. But there's two interesting things about calling the food system a food system, or three interesting things. One is that no one did it until 10 years ago. I don't know who the first, but no one thought of it that way. Two is that system implies that it's intentional, but it's only intentional in retrospect, and it's only intentional to those it profits. No one else really benefits from it. No one else intentionally organizes this food system. And the third thing, which Michael just said, and which is really why a food policy could be so beneficial, is that it's a ball of string or a skein of wool or whatever, and any part of it that you pull will affect the whole thing. So if you talk about farm labor, you can't change farm labor without changing farming practices. You can't change farming practices without changing soil health. You can't change soil health without changing what you're going to grow. You can't change what you're going to grow without changing what you're going to eat, and so on. And any of those things that I mentioned holds true for any of those other things also. So the fact that we do have a Clean Water Act in the United States, which has been a really good thing, actually. And we have air regulations also, but we don't have a Soil Health Act. For example, we don't even have a Human Health Act. And because we do food, we write about food, we naturally thought of a food policy, but we knew and we know that anything we started to talk about in a food policy would affect all of these other things, and that by improving any one thing, we would have to talk about improving all of these things. And for a while, it didn't make it into print, and it didn't even make it into our drafts, but for a while we were calling it a food and wellness or a food and well-being policy, because it's not just about what you grow, it's about what you eat, and it's about health. And I warned Michael about this earlier today. At some point, I want to talk about even love and other emotions, because this stuff is very profound. And I think no one, we both revere Wendell Berry, and no one has really picked up the mantle of addressing these things almost strictly from a moral perspective and almost strictly from a human perspective. And that's something I think we really ought to change. And I think maybe we'll wait I'll say what I think about that a little bit later.
I think one of this sort of connects to that idea, but one of the things is, as you're thinking about what you want to do and what you think is worth doing, is figuring out what, in your view, success would look like in terms of changing the food system. A question I often ask audiences is, so how would you feel if McDonald's went organic? If Walmart had all pastured meat? And everyone has a kind of sinking feeling about that. It's not what we want. And why not? I mean, that would represent a really significant... If Coca-Cola went organic, think about the acres of cornfield that wouldn't be sprayed with atrazine, that, you know, and the farmers who'd be protected, and the soil that would be improved by that, to have all that organic high fructose corn syrup. Isn't that a good thing? And the fact that people don't seem to think it's that good a thing indicates that they're looking for some intangibles from this movement and from this issue. And I think they are. And I think Gary alluded to this, but the food movement is very much a communitarian movement. A lot of what people are drawn to is a new way of organizing their economic relationships.